Welcome. Today we're going to talk about when you don't like popular books or books that have been recommended to you. If you like this type of content, the best way to support the channel is go to curtismchale.ca/membership. Other ways to support, join the book club, curtismchale.ca/book club, or my other weekly newsletter where I talk about mostly thoughts coming from my reading, like this, curtismchale.ca/3threads. Although it's really just one, so I should probably change it to that. Anyway, when you don't like books. So one of the most recent books that I read and just had to put down was The Black Swan. This has been often talked about as like an excellent book that you really need to look at, and it's so good and so whatever. Right, it gets quoted often. I've even quoted or used parts of it when I talk about Umberto Eco and the Anti-Library, which I talked about a while ago. And when you look at that, though, when I looked at the book and I kept reading it, right, there's one scene he paints in like Australia, and he's looking at their opera house. I don't remember what it's called. It's the big, I think it might just be the Sydney Opera House with the, when you think of Australia, you think of some big architecture. It's probably the one you're thinking of. And it talks about all these people in ties and dressed nicely and everything else. And he's like, but I'm not here to talk to these new rich people who really won't have their riches in a few years, right? Kind of degrading them. And I kept seeing scenes like this where he's talking about basically how him and his friends are more intellectual than others and saying like, I can't do it. Like, this book seems to be more about aggrandizing yourself, showing how smart you are than anything else. And even coming up with new names for like confirmation bias. He's like, I always call it this, and goes on. And I looked up and it's like, when was this published? Like decades after confirmation bias was like the accepted term for the thing you're talking about. So he just makes up his own words for things. So I had to put that book down. Now, that's very rare. Even when I do finish a book, I don't like everything I read. In many cases, it honestly feels fine. I read a book, I'm like, that wasn't it. And I don't feel bad about it. But when it's a book like The Black Swan, or some others we'll talk about, I feel like a little fraud sometimes. In worst cases, someone's actually recommended me a book, and I read it, and they're like, what is it? Because they want to follow up and find out if you really like the book that you read based on their recommendation. And when you come out and say, no, I didn't, like, I've been told that I don't get it. I'm actually, we'll talk about this in a minute too, that I just don't get it. I don't like it. I need to go back and reread it again because I clearly don't get it. So one of the most recent ones of that was Jaws. Came very highly recommended from a coworker, and I thought it was a dud. My first indication was that the science-y author, right, this is like a lady had an idea, and her friend was Paul Ehrlich of the population bomb infamy. We'll say infamy. Because he wrote this book called The Population Bomb, saying that, basically population is going to blow up and the world's going to be terrible and it's going to happen by this time, which was like 20 years ago. And he keeps like redoubling down on this and why his predictions have changed. And it's like a cult, really. It seems more like a cult, and a religious leader says, we're going to get taken away by aliens soon. You just wait. And it didn't happen because of something else. So the science was thin, and it really seemed like a thinly veiled push for eugenics, right? Talking about all these children with their poor, weak jaws must have some problems, and if they were raised, by families that had more money and could just do all these other, it was just bad. It was bad. Now, possibly most awkward, though, was The Success Grower, which was written by my friend, Mark, and he was actually in a book club with him at the time. And I read his book, and I thought, there's a lot of good insights in here. I like it, but it's a dialogue book, right, where they're talking to this older person, getting advice from them. And I thought that the dialogue was at times strange. Not even all the time, just sometimes I was like, no one's going to say that. Or, what, really? And he actually, when I wrote that, he got on a call with me because he was upset that I said that about his book, and he was very upset that I didn't give it a wholehearted endorsement. I just don't know what to say. And then you even get to this little person who recommended me Jaws. Recommended me a couple other books, and none of them have been great. And they haven't been bad. There was another one that was just not what I'm going to do with my writing. It was, here's how you communicate. And I looked at it and said, I'm never going to do this. This is not the type of writing or the type of communication that I would ever read. For me, it's probably good governmental communication, right? Just being short to the point, stuff like that. So I didn't. And his further recommendations, I just been like, oh, thank you, and ignore because I'm not going to read them. Now, where I question myself personally most, because the other two you feel kind of bad, but whatever, is when I read some all-fired recommended book that you see on lists all the time, and it's a bad book, like The Black Swan. So another one is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is recommended all over the place. It's great. I read the book, And I read some chapters twice because I'd go through and be like, there's a lot of buzzwords in here, but I have no idea what the author's saying. I'd read it, I'd try to take notes, and I'd reread a sentence and be like, well, what did they say in this paragraph? And I have no bloody idea what they said after multiple tries at this. But this book, for some reason, continues to make these lists of things you must read because it's an excellent book. It doesn't make my list, though. Another book I liked, I didn't find it as impactful as everyone seems to say I should, was A Man's Search for Meaning. Now, the beginning bit where he's talking about his concentration camp stuff, that chart really good. I enjoyed that in the end. Enjoyed as much as you can enjoy a book like that. I liked the insights. I found them useful. Right, it was good. I keep some of those ideas floating around regularly for myself. But his end of the book, where he's looking at logotherapy and trying to explain that to you, I read through it and people are like, logotherapy is so good. I read it and I was like, man, this is not really it. This is just not really something that I think is worthwhile. And in that case, especially because of because it's come out of the Holocaust, I feel bad about that. In some ways, I feel like an intellectual fraud because I don't get some of these books and I read them and I'm like, this is a bad book. It's also entirely possible that I'm right, though, and that these books aren't as good as people say, or don't have the depth, at least for me, as they say, right? Was it Greg McEwen wrote Essentialism? You see that cited all the time in productivity books, and when I read it, I was like, I read all this. But is that because I read other books that jumped off his work later, or is it just like because it was not a good book? I don't know in that case. Now, you also get other books like Read, Write, Own by Chris Dixon, I believe. There are links to all these books in the show notes if you want to check them out, where it pushed as this hyped, awesome book, and you saw it recommended everywhere. And when I read it, I was like, it's a crypto guy saying crypto's awesome, basically. And the way I'm doing crypto, none of these scammers are bad. Just the way we do crypto is good. When you look into him, he's like a partner at A16Z, and all the people, many of the people pushing the book are crypto enthusiasts who stand to benefit a lot from him. In fact, some people are like his bosses and his investments and the companies that his company invests in that bought these books and drove out the sales numbers, which is something authors do to try and not even game the system. That's how the system works. You do pre-orders, you do all the other things so that it shows up on the bestseller lists. But yeah, it was a techno-utopian bro book where bros were promoting the techno-utopian bro book. There's another one, Deep Work. Love that book. Actually loved So Good They Can't Ignore You, both by Cal Newport. I really like those. But his later books, Digital Minimalism, A World Without Email, and Slow Productivity, a lot of fluff. It tries to sound, I think they try to sound smart. There's very little that moves past Deep Work, in my opinion, as far as anything useful. But I love Deep Work so much. I think I've read it 3 times. I loved it so much that I felt bad not liking his later works and looking at them and being like, his podcast is even pretty decent, right? There's often oh, that's a good point. We should look at how I do this. But I kept them on my shelf, and I can kind of see my pile down here of books I'm going to get rid of. His books are in, some of those books are in there. Not Deep Work, not So Good They Can't Ignore You, but the other ones are in there because I was keeping them to have a complete set of Newports that. Ultimately, his books will be likely to be a dime a dozen in the future. They're not going to be some collectible book. But out of a sense of care for the author, because the author did impact me, I was keeping these other books around that really aren't good. Some parasocial relationship solidarity, I suppose. Now, really at the end of it, the arbiter of a good book is you. Did you like the book? Did it speak to you at that time in your life? Did you enjoy it? Does it make you a better person? Even if it was not a serious book by others, people say, oh, this wasn't a really good book. Did you like it? And that's fine. So if you liked Jaws, I guess that's fine. If you liked some of the other books I've mentioned, then great, go for it. I actually don't care. It doesn't impact me, and that's one of my points. My kids are still going to love me. My wife's still going to be here. My dog will still want me to throw her a ball. And some of these ideas extend to fiction as well, right? The Fourth Wing is a very popular book by Rebecca Yarros, I believe, and her whole series. But I also see it being panned in some literary circles that I follow because it's just a fantasy romance. It's a generic dragon book with some sex thrown in. But I enjoyed it. I'm not apologizing for it either. So, you should enjoy what you enjoy. You should read what you read. And I need to, I suppose, give up the fear that someone following this, reading the newsletters, reading my site, watching my videos, is going to think I'm an intellectual fraud because I didn't like found lame and useless some highly intellectual book that they really liked. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I should read. There's so much to read out there. There's so much good stuff to read out there that's going to speak to me, that I'm going to enjoy, that I shouldn't worry about what is, literally smart or makes me look good. That's it. If you like the video, thumbs up below. Subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. Best way to support the channel is to become a member. curtismchale.ca/membership. Members get my courses and get my book notes. Have an awesome day.